Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon if you're in legal, compliance, ethics, HR. I am coming live and direct from Daddy Daycare. My wife is on vacation, and I am juggling kids today. So if you see bags under my eyes or beads of sweat dropping down my forehead, it's from that. It's a much harder job than I guess I thought. But we have an awesome episode for you guys today. We are going to be talking about ethical coupon cutters. Okay, stretching your budget. We have a bunch of great guests, the one and only Matt Kelly. But before that, quick announcements. Sign up and follow us. We've shifted our book giveaways, which I'll talk about here in a second. We're going to be giving those away to Ethicsverse members. So when you subscribe to the Ethicsverse, you don't have to sort through what's coming up. You just have trusted us that we're going to be bringing you great content every single week. Those things are going to show up right on your calendar, and you can start to forward those to your friends so that we can continue to grow this amazing community that we're all a part of. Follow Ethico in the middle, hit that QR code. We might do a link tree. We might really step our game up here and make this easier. But if you follow the Ethico page, we get all the best clips from our web, our podcast, the Ethicsverse, and our weekly webinar series, the Ethicsverse. All the best clips are there. You can kind of stay in tune with what's coming up. And you can follow me on LinkedIn if you like. Wink, wink, do it. Today's prizes are Level Up. So Mary Shirley just launched her book for pre-order. I got an early copy. This book is phenomenal. You guys are going to love it. There's so many hacks in the book, and it's appropriate that we're talking about it today because of today's topic of stretching our budget. So best comments, best participation in the chat for Ethicsverse members. You will be open for a drawing, as they say, of 5 books. But if you want to just jump in and buy one for yourself, hit that QR code, and that'll take you directly to a special offer. So we're going to be giving 5 of those back to you all because we love you. And the ecosystem is popping. So if you guys are interested in that, if you just want to see what's out there, let us know. You can go to the website and have a leave your wallet at home, leave your purse at home demo, and see how our new data analytics platform can integrate with the other tools that your team might work with, and get some actionable information right at your fingertips. With that, I'm going to pass it over to the man, the myth, the legend, the coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly. How's it going, Matt?
Very good, Nick. Thank you to be back here again. Good to join you. So hello, everybody who is joining us, and thank you all. I see already we have plenty of people chiming in the chat about where they are from, including people from Sydney, Australia. I don't even know what time it might be there or what day of the week, and someone from Santiago, Chile. I will be there myself in December. So if you want, anybody who's listening, please just pop in where you are dialing in from today in the chat. It's a great way to break the ice. So we have some great speakers today. First off, joining us is Jenny McVeigh. She is the North America Compliance Officer for bioMérieux. I believe I am pronouncing that right. So, Jenny, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Round of applause for a little French from Matt today. I love it.
Did I get the French pronunciation right, Jenny?
Close enough. Close enough for us, though.
My 7th grade French teacher would be pleased, and she'd also say it's close enough, but not right. And also, I think on the line is Matt Silverman, who is head of global trade compliance and senior counsel at Viavi Solutions. Matt Silverman, are you dialing in? Nope. Matt had some problems trying to get online earlier, so I think he is trying to dial in. And if he does, we'll just loop him right in once he emerges. But for everybody else who is on the call, we are here today, as Nick said, to talk about stretching your ethics and compliance budget. I'm sure that is a subject near and dear to everybody's heart because I've been in this business a long time, and I keep on hearing that budgets are rather tight for compliance functions. So what we want to do is cover a couple of big, broad ideas. Number one, even before you get to the coupon cutting, how do you actually prioritize what your compliance goals are and your priorities that you really want to focus on? If you have precious few dollars, how do you figure out which are the smartest investments to make? How do you work with some other business functions? Probably HR, probably legal, maybe IT security, maybe others. But how do you, the compliance officer, deal with some of the other functions out there to see if they can do some of the water carrying for you and help you to get your message out there and leverage it all. Certainly, if any attendees today, if you have good tips and good cheat sheet ideas on how to stretch your dollar a bit further, how to run some training on the cheap, how to do something else that stretches the budget, chime in throughout the hour. We've got that chat budget with the chat box going along there. So please give us your ideas. We'll try and work lots of them in. But we definitely want to see if there are any tips and techniques that others can use. I also, maybe at the very end, would want to talk a bit about how you actually make sure that your budget priorities are working. How do you measure success? How do you realize this is not the best idea? I should change tactics and invest over here instead of what I had been doing. How do you figure out what does work and what doesn't? And of course, at the very end, we'll try and set aside some time for questions as well. So that is all that I wanted to go through. I will start, Jenny, with you and just basically ask, like, what's the toughest part about budgeting for a compliance program? Is it setting priorities? Is it arguing for money with the overlords who control the purse? Is it some other thing about making ends meet or what? But like, what do you think are some of the big obstacles compliance officers are faced with?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes to all the above. So next question. No, that was a joke, Matt. So yeah, I think all of the above. I think that regardless if you're in a compliance function or not, the topic of budget, headcount, resources to help you do what you were hired to do, right? What your expectations are, is always really tough. And then when it comes to compliance, there's always a higher power that you're going to have to answer to in terms of, okay, it's not just about the leadership within the organization, but gosh, if, knock on wood, if a prosecutor came in or if there's an investigation, how is this going to protect, how am I going to position this so that it looks that we are actually protecting the company? Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not, I think that is always something that we have to think about, is coming back to center. It's like, what are we doing and how are we going to demonstrate that we are protecting the company based upon the resources and the budget that we have now, right? Because there's only so much that you can do. There's only so much that compliance professionals can do. So that's what always brings me back to center, is if I'm struggling with a decision, if I'm struggling with, hey, I can't get there or whatnot, I always come back to, all right, but if a prosecutor comes in, am I going to be able to explain to them, right, what we're trying to do, and the budget, the resources, this is probably the best that we can do, and here are the reasons why. Everything's documented. Right? Mm-hmm. I know that that's a big no-no for legal colleagues, right? But from a compliance standpoint, we always want to be able to demonstrate intent, right? We always want to show, like, hey, look, we may not be able to do it this year, or it may not be really gangbusters in a blowout program this year, but this is what we're going to do to get there maybe in next year or 2 years or 3 years, right? So I think that those are really important things. But yeah, it's all a challenge, right? Because especially with an organization where that might not necessarily be used to having a compliance function, or not really mm-hmm. understanding the value or what the compliance function does, it's hard to convince, hey, I'm going to need X amount of dollars this year with 10 head count. Right. We all know that getting headcount is nearly impossible, for any functional area. So it's tough. It's tough.
Matt Silverman, did you dial in yet? Are you on the call?
Hey, I'm here. Just kidding. That was me. That was me. I was being a ventriloquist. Sorry.
So Matt is on the call, right?
I don't think he's been able to get back in, but I do a good Matt in case you want me to.
You do. Well, Nick, let me ask you to unpack a bit of some of what Jenny was saying, because I hear a lot about, you're trying to demonstrate that you're making a sincere effort. And it's a lot of it on plans and markers to show people we're not going to have the perfect program today, but this is what we're doing in year 1, year 2, and 3. I'm going to try and knock down these pillars instead. So give me your thoughts about what you either hear from clients that you're dealing with or in your own observation. Like, what do you think are the big struggles with trying to get a compliance budget up and running?
I think what Jenny said, it was pretty spot on. And I think we have to show that intent, and we have to have a mentality where we're really trying to solve for outcome. And if you're trying to solve for outcome, it implies that you already have a picture of what that outcome is. And none of us have like as many resources as we want, right? Like we'd all love more heads. We'd all love more budget to get more tools. We'd all love more time in the day and so forth. But I think if we can have that mentality of like trying to solve for outcome, it now opens us up to say like, okay, I want to hit that summit. Well, there's several different paths there, and there's a basic path that maybe costs a lot of money, but maybe there's some other kind of shortcuts I can get there, and some ways I can stretch my budget or use some hacks to kind of achieve that same end. I think that kind of a mentality just in life, that high agency mentality, is a lot healthier of a mentality to have versus the fixed mentality that many of us, we all have that, right? We all have that fixed mentality that we fight against. And I think if we can really try to, oversample and really lean into that high agency approach, it's going to allow for a lot more creativity, and it's going to give us a lot more, I think, persuasive power when we're going to those people that control the purse strings to say, like, we need to achieve this. We need to have this tool, or we need to have this kind of an outcome. And I'm doing my best to solve it, with X, Y, and Z. But if I really had a couple of more bucks, or if I had one extra head, or, if I could tie that, if you could tie that down to some value, I think it opens some things up. But that, solve for outcome mentality, I think, allows for that, that intent that Jenny was just talking about to really, blossom and not be limited by some of our limited thinking,
Mm-hmm. I see we already have our first tip from a listener, from Cara Novelli, who is saying, leverage your executive admins to help distribute and enforce E&C messages. With staff meetings and newsletters and whatnot, they can be your extended comms team. That is a very good one. If anybody else also has tips, you want to pop them in, go right ahead. I also wanted to ask the attendees, I'm going to put out a yes-no poll here. Like, broadly speaking, how comfortable are you that you have enough compliance budget? I know everybody's going to say, I wish I had more, but in reality, yes, I have enough to get by, or no, I'm in dire straits. Just pop in the yes or no. I'd be curious what people say. Put that in the chat, and I promise I won't tell anybody who said what. It'll all be anonymous as much as it can be on a chat. But just yes or no, how comfortable are you with the budget you have? Jenny, let me go back to you. Oh yeah,
sorry,
go ahead,
I was
Jenny.
going to say, if I may, and dovetail off of what Nick's comment, I couldn't agree more with what Nick said. And I think that there's some certain things that about breaking out of the traditional compliance profession mode that we are challenged as professionals to do. And it doesn't matter what industry, right? Because as you know, the compliance function is still very young compared to other departments, right? It's born and bred out of the legal department. And so it still carries a lot of that traditional approach of, compliance is here to make sure that you stay in the boundaries, that you have rules and whatnot. But I think that as we are moving forward and moving more and more, and as we're seeing more of the enforcement actions overseas, as well as here in North America, United States in particular, is that we're realizing that the DOJ really is serious when they say effective, right? Effective compliance program. So I think that also helps with some of the creativity in terms of, and prioritization, as far as, well, I would love to have all the elements of the compliance program all locked and loaded, right? I would love to have, all the policies and procedures, the governance documents in place, and, a really, really best-in-class training program and whatnot. But the reality is that the budget or the resources or even the culture may not allow you to do that effectively. So what can you do that's going to be effective, right? So what can you do that you can actually demonstrate, all right, here are the big hits that we can do, right? To what I was saying before, plan it out, right? And say, and I didn't answer your question, Matt, about metrics. How do you know you're being successful? So plan it out. See what, a small snippet of that would look like in year one, right? Or the next
Right.
6 months, to demonstrate success, to demonstrate effectiveness, right? And then that also brings more people on board. That gets the buy-in, saying, oh, I see where you're going, and it gets more and more buy-in. It's the long game. It's definitely the long game, but I think that that's what's important to make sure that it's effective.
I really like that point. And I was jotting a lot of notes down now, Jenny, where you said, what can you do that is effective? And I keep going back to the Justice Department knows that you're not going to have a perfect program. They know that the vast majority of companies, you're not going to have all the funds that you want. I do think that if you can demonstrate, look, this is why I picked this one thing as being really important, and so I'm making sure this is effective. I don't know if that's communications or training or data analytics or something else. You'd have to decide on your own. But I think if you could argue that this is why I picked this one thing and decided to make it effective, my gut is that Justice Department, regulatory examiners, if you're a bank or somebody else in healthcare, you go through audits with HHS, something like that. I think they get that. I think they appreciate it. I also think if you do have a really big mess where you're going to have to be effective a lot of things, I somehow suspect at that point the CEO and general counsel will have already received the message. We can't give the short shrift to compliance anymore. But back to the poll from the users, I did see a lot of users, frankly, admitting no, they wish they had more budget. They're not comfortable with what they like. A couple of people who said they had no budget at all. That's you have my sympathies. That's a tough position to be in. Jenny, I wanted to circle back and actually ask, even before we get to the coupon cutting and the stretching ideas, could you talk a little more about how you do prioritize your goals? Like you said, pick the one thing that you can be effective on. Well, how do you pick that? Is it based on a risk assessment? Is it based on some other thing that, I know that I'd be able to leverage this the most, so this is what I'm going to do, even if I'm ignoring these other risks right now that are just beyond my control? Like, how do you sort out that these are the 2 or 3 priorities that I am going to make sure I can do those effective? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think, it's not a you go in there and, in an hour you can figure it out, right? It's a long game, because you have to understand what is the priorities of the leadership, right? And what's their culture? What's their palette? What do they envision or view compliance to be? Because that's going to really help you to then, make your best arguments. So you have to really position yourself to understand what drives leadership, what it motivates them, so that you could actually speak to them when you're asking for things. So that's one part of it, right? Is the actual, how do you speak to your leadership? How do you figure this out without trying to sound like the sky is falling, right? Or that you need this, but that actually gets them on your side to help support you. Second thing is really looking at from a 20,000 foot view, right? What's going on with the culture here, right? Hate to say this, but I think you understand what I'm saying, from the bottoms up approach, right? So the top down approach is understanding the culture, their palette, what's motivating them, how you can communicate, and then do a bottoms up approach, right? What did the staff, what did the team say? How are they actually perceiving compliance to be? Are we in a culture that is very bottoms up? Is it really fostered by the middle management? So those are things to really understand your environment, because otherwise you're just going to come in and say, we need X, Y, and Z, without there being any buy-in or understanding, right? And then from there, then you start looking at, in my point of view, you start looking at, all right, so where are we in terms of risk management, right? Compliance risk management with respect to the key areas of this industry. So for example, I'm in pharma life sciences, and I've been here for the last, 16 years, right? So, it's like I look at where we are, and then, okay, so what are the high risks from a regulatory and government standpoint, from a legal standpoint? The anti-kickback is one of our hugest in any pharma and life science, right? So what activities are we doing or aren't we doing? Like, is there a really good understanding from a cultural standpoint and a knowledge standpoint, an understanding standpoint in how these activities could translate into some really, really bad perceptions, raising red flags and such. So I think that it's a lot, but I think that by taking the time to really examine this, it's going to help you in the future. Right. And the thing, too, is that, we all come in as compliance professionals and we're like, we need policies, procedures, training, communication. We need to make sure there's a hotline, there's disciplinary action, all the elements. Right. But before you get there, right, because we don't even know, you may not even know if it's adequately resourced to be able to support all those things. Right. So what are the activities or what are the key areas that if somebody came in today, they'd be like, what is going on here? All right. So it's not so much about the compliance program per se, but it's more about the business risk and how the organization is looking by somebody looking in. And I think that's where that's how you start, because otherwise, if you just concentrate on building the elements of the compliance program, how effective is that going to be? Because the organization may not be ready for best-in-class training. Maybe you have to really, really simplify the training, right, to what is resounding to them. So we come in as like, oh my gosh, there's like nothing here, right? But we may say that, oh, there's nothing here. There's no pillars, but there's probably a lot more than you probably think. But it's going to take time to dig in, to really understand, right? So that should, at any day, somebody comes in, a prosecutor, an investigator comes in, you can explain. So here is what's going on here. Here's the environment, before you go into what the gaps are. I don't know if that makes sense, Matt.
It does. And Nick Gallo, I wanted to ask you a bit about what you think of this. I especially liked Jenny's ideas about sort of stepping outside the program and looking at it with a fresh eye. Yeah. Which I'm not sure a lot of compliance officers can easily do that, because a lot of us are immersed in a program, and like we've always done it this way is a trap that can affect a lot of people, a lot of companies. But what do you think about, how to try to figure out this is where I will be able to maximize my most advantage? So I'll do these 2 or 3 things first. Like, how would you work through that sort of a question?
So I think there's 2 concepts that kind of dovetail well with what Jenny was just talking about. And the one concept is the Pareto principle, which guides everything in my life. And that's the 80-20 rule. So of those 7 elements, there's probably 2 of them that are going to have the most bang for the buck. So like, yes, that's nice to have a check mark next to each one of those things, but like 2 out of those 7 or 1 out of those 7 are really going to move the needle. So find that. Like, our world is a fractal of Paretos. Like, there's Paretos everywhere. And once you knock off that first Pareto, now there's another Pareto. And like that's a way to kind of iterate through, general improvement and really finding where you're going to get the bang for the buck. And the other concept is thinking in bets. So there's this book by this woman named Annie Duke, who was a World Series of Poker champ. She had the bracelet, and she wrote this book, Thinking in Bets. And it's such an eye-opening perspective. And if you think about 2 different games, think about a chess game and you think about a poker game. In a chess game, all the information is on the board, right? I can see all of your pieces. You can see all of my pieces. I obviously don't know what strategy you're going to employ. But the other game, poker, there's so much missing information, right? And I have my hard cards hidden. You have your cards hidden. There's cards that are going to continue to be overturned. In our lives, in general, in our lives in ethics and compliance in particular, is much more like thinking in bets. And if we can get comfortable with the concept that like we don't have all the information and we can think in bets, well, we're not going to go all in on every single hand. We're only going to go all in on the hands that like that's a good bet for, right? So many times, given how like ubiquitous and how democratized like tech is, how many tools and stuff are out there, you can start to think in bets before you make a massive investment in a brand new policy program or a massive investment in a, like, I don't know, like a culture survey or something like that. start thinking in bets and start using Google Forms and send that around and start to get a sense for like what this thing looks like. You're never going to get down to perfect. Like we just never are, right? It's always a moving target because our organizations change and our regulations change and our markets change and our people change. And like, there's just all this change going on. But if we can be about 80% right, all the time, we're going to be in a great spot. So I think that thinking in bets thing and like just saying like, oh, then the third one, I meant three. The third one is this concept from software development called MVP, a minimum viable product. So like, how can you leverage some tech? How can I go on Canva with a free account, not spend a dime, and start to put together some, I don't know, some little graphics that I can send around to middle managers? Or how can I help IT and say, hey, can we put our speak up, number or our little speak up blurb on everybody's signature for the next quarter? Like these are little things that we can do that can give us like a massive bang for our buck. But I think again, I just think it all comes back to like our mentality and our mindset. Like it's never going to be perfect. We're never going to be able to have perfect green, gold, whatever check marks next to all seven of those things. These targets are going to keep moving. But if we can, to Jenny's point from earlier, show that intent, have that sort of solve for outcome focus, incorporate some minimum viable product and start thinking in bets. I think a lot of these things that seem so massive, like a massive like mountain to climb, they really end up turning into molehills and we can start running a lot faster.
So Matt Silverman, I understand you are now on the phone with us. Is that right?
I'm here, and I apologize for the technical issues. Hopefully I'm coming through okay.
You are. Sound great. So I don't know how much you've heard in the last few minutes here, Matt, but I did want to get your perspective as well along these same lines. Like, how do you think through the very limited number of things you do want to try and tackle now because you don't have a great budget? So I'm going to do these one or two or three things well because I can, and that will deliver the most advantage. I'll leave everything else to next budget cycle or something like that. Like, how do you think through some of that and what Nick and Jenny have been talking about?
Yeah, so thanks, and I'll try not to because I obviously missed some of this. If I'm repeating something that someone else has said, I apologize. But I'm focused on global trade compliance. I do some AML work, some anti-corruption as well. But really, my focus is global trade, and I'm sure that most people on the call that may not necessarily be their area, but I think a similar kind of theory applies or application, which is. We really do kind of do a bit of a risk map, a heat map in terms of where we have the highest priorities for compliance. So in global trade, that can sometimes be regional based on areas of the world. For us, it's oftentimes APAC, China. Obviously, last year we had a lot going on with regard to the Russia sanctions. So a big part of what we do is based on globally where we have more concerns. For other people who may be listening, it may not really be from a global perspective or a country perspective. It may be more applicable to, a certain subject matter or a certain type of compliance. But we often look at it from a regional, global perspective. And oftentimes, where are the departments or the areas that haven't been, for example, trained up in 2 or 3 years, right? Maybe it's HR, maybe it's our sales folks. So it's kind of a combination of what are the new regulatory issues, how do they impact us in a certain country or area, and then as well, if our sales folks in this region or in this department just had training on this 6 months ago or last year, maybe we can look to another department and kind of focus our training, our surveys, our outreach on an area that's been neglected, if you want to say that. So we kind of take all those things into approach when we're trying to figure out where we should focus our efforts. Obviously, we don't completely sacrifice one area for the other. We don't say we're putting all our resources into this other area is not going to get any attention. So we try to cover our bases, but when it comes to really focusing on budget, and a lot of the times for us that does involve training, that's kind of one way of looking at it in terms of a risk map or a heat map of the areas that are most impactful.
All right. So I want to shift gears a bit now away from that sort of planning and assessment stage. I want to get to the good stuff, talking about some practical ideas to maximize your influence and leverage the resources you have. Matt Silverman, I'll stick with you just to give you a fair share of airtime here. Like, tell me about one or two of the good go-to moves that you like to be able to leverage the compliance officer's influence and, stretch the budget, basically. I know you've mentioned before things like ambassadors or champions and that sort of a thing, but what do you try to do? What do you like to develop?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with what you said there, which is I'm a huge proponent of champions programs. Some people call them ambassador networks or focals or liaisons. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but a champions network is a fantastic way to really leverage the people in your organization, right? They're not your subject matter experts, nor do you want them to be your subject matter experts in compliance. But if you've got a limited budget, if you know that you're not going to be able to hire and give a full benefits and salary and all the things that go with it to another compliance person in this part of the world or in this department, et cetera, it's a great way to kind of leverage the people that are already in your organization who may be able to provide support. And sometimes that support, it might be doing substantive investigations, but it's probably not. It's probably just, at the least, being your eyes and ears, looking out for potential compliance issues or concerns that you wouldn't otherwise know about because you're sitting 1,000 miles away. It's in many cases, and this is where I found it most useful in organizations where I've worked for, it's helping us to flow down compliance policies, new processes, new ways of working, so that instead of me sitting in Phoenix, Arizona, sending out an email to everybody in the world saying, this is the new compliance policy, make sure to follow it, right? We can work with people in different departments, whether it's HR, sales, marketing, finance, in different parts of the world, and we can train them to be our champions. And they can go out to their departments, to their sites, and they can be an advocate, right, for compliance. So they can go at their monthly team meeting or weekly team meeting and say, this is a new policy that the compliance department is trying to push out. Let's all make sure to read it and come back to me and tell me how this applies or doesn't apply, how it works or doesn't work, where there might be gaps that are specific to our location, to our region, to our department. And then those champions can come back to you and say, this policy, no one's going to follow it because this site operates a little bit differently. Or this policy that you've put together or trying to put together, it's really U.S.-centric, or it's really focused on this department, but in terms of HR trying to apply it, here's where we have some difficulties. So you can use champions for a lot of different things. Obviously, they can also help you to, hang up posters and send emails and put articles on an intranet site. They can help you do all that kind of publicizing and compliance awareness, but they really can help you to spread your compliance initiatives and be those eyes and ears and people on the ground who are really trying to help you push out your initiatives, your programs, that awareness.
So let me ask another question of all the attendees here, if you want to answer in the chat function. How many of you use some sort of ambassador or champion program? And what do you use them for? Do you use them just to do more logistical support? Do you use them as the eyes and ears? Do you use them to help you develop effective policies because they know what really will work in their place? Something entirely different, I don't know. But while attendees are giving us their thoughts in the chat, Jenny, let me circle back to you. What are some of the go-to moves, like whether it's an ambassador program or something else? I don't know. But what are some of your ideas? And then Nick, I'll get to you after that.
Yeah, and I think what Matt Silverman said was pretty much the nail on the head. And if you look at it, right, what he's talking about is champions. And I'm looking at some of the chats, and there's the comment of, coming from a friendly or known source is always better received. Absolutely. So what is this all really saying, right, about an ambassador program or a champions program or whatever we want to call it, is that this is asking us as compliance professionals to really foster, right, that openness, that friendliness, that we're here to help, that, this isn't we're not here to tell you the no. We're not the no police, like the compliance professionals traditionally have been, right? So I think that any way that you can figure out how to, with the Champions program, I think is a great idea, right? But if there's any way that you can be as close to the employees as possible so they know that this isn't gotcha moment when I walk into the door, when I send you an email, right? Because that's already the perception, no matter how long-standing you are in an organization or not, right? As soon as you say, oh, I'm the compliance officer, all of a sudden, everybody shuts up because they're like, don't say anything, right? But I think that with the Champions programs, with, going in and, making sure that they spread the, whatever it may be, the whole point is, right? How are you as an individual and as a compliance officer, what message are you saying through your team and through the other employees as well? That what are you exuding in terms of your approachability? And we're here with you, right? And that should, in my opinion, that should be also demonstrated in any presentation that you have or whatnot. So I know that that's kind of like the very high level strategic overview. As far as some of the tactics that I've used in the past and currently as well, is obviously the Champions team, I think, is a huge win for a lot of different companies that don't have the headcount or the resources. And again, it's one of those, okay, so why would these individuals be bought in to do this, to carry the torch for you, when they're not part of are they getting a bonus? Are they getting, right? What is it? And I think that this is where you dig in deep with your HR, right? To understand development programs, right? Development, how do we incentivize from a career development standpoint? Because not everybody may be able to say, and you then will be rewarded with whatever it may be, right? So, because most everybody is very invested in their own, in their career development. So what could this potentially look like for you as a champion, right? As you go out there, you're part of a functional unit that is not even close to, that's so upstream maybe, but why would this matter to you? Like, why would this be something that's really a good idea if you do it, right? So if you think about it, all those things that we're saying is really partnering closely with the HR team, closely with the management team to get their buy-in. It's a lot of work, but it's really fostering that, hey, how do we go ahead and weave ourselves in? I call it the hide the vegetable approach, right? Where as we all been challenged, whether it was with children or with, I know for me, it's with my dogs getting their pills, right? Is that you hide it, right? Because you know that it's better for them. But if you told your children, no, you must eat your Brussels sprouts or your broccoli, right? They're going to be adverse to it. They see it coming. They have to prepare themselves, a lot of anxiety, right? So any way that you can figure out, well, how do we weave this in behind the vegetable approach so that the employees start to do it, right? But they don't realize they're doing it. And when it comes time to reveal, but you've been doing it the whole entire time, the change management's there, right? Then they realize, oh, hey, it's not so bad after all, right? So I think that any way that you can do that is going to be really effective.
So,
and use
Nick,
the natural desire that people have to work in a high integrity organization to hide those vegetables, right? I mean, that's such a basis for these ambassador programs. Like many times I've heard tons of anecdotes of people being able to roll that out and people raising their hand because everybody wants to be part of an organization that they can be proud of, an organization, whose deed follows its word, whose high integrity. And if that can be the peanut butter for I don't know, I don't have dogs, but then you put pills in peanut butter or something like we can weave that stuff in. And now, I mean, what a way to really create some leverage and start to crowdsource the change management that needs to occur in order for any change to actually take place in the organization. One other hack I just want to talk about that we've used in our organization to great effect is, we have a culture we have an employee satisfaction survey every quarter. And in that survey, we have an area where people can, give compliments to other people in the organization. This does not cost a lot of money. And then every quarter, we take all of those compliments and we put them up on the wall. And this might seem a little bit like maybe a step or two removed from what we're talking about. But what we've seen this do in our organization is people feel more a part of this thing, and they feel like this is their thing. And if you can get to the point where the people in your organization feel like the culture is theirs, well, now they're going to be arbiters of that culture. They're going to be guardians of it, and they're going to be much more inclined to be a part of whatever changes you have to push out. When you can overlay some ethical ambassadors on top of it, to their point, I mean, these are massive points of leverage for a small ethics and compliance team that doesn't have, there was 30 freaking no's in the chat that doesn't have the budget it needs to really push out its impact across a broader group of people. But again, it comes from that like little reframe, and it comes from like some small tweaks, and both of which don't really cost a lot of money. It might cost a little bit of time, but that's what we're paid for. We're paid to make the right bets with our time that are going to generate the most impact for our organization. That's what our job is at the end of the day.
So I actually had another somewhat related question, more for the attendees out there. I'm curious how many of you have ever used compliance interns? And I mean that in the actual traditional sense of interns from a local college or university who might want to work in corporate compliance. It sticks in my mind because at Boston University, which is only about 1.5 miles from where I live, their law school actually runs a corporate compliance clinic in addition to, fair housing clinics or criminal defense clinics and pro bono work and whatnot. And they have some law students who actually are happy to work on corporate compliance projects. And I have often wondered if they could be people who help you at a reasonable cost, reasonable head count. They, if they're in law school, they probably have some semblance of knowing what it is that you do. Just yes or no, has anybody on the call today ever used something like a compliance intern, either at the undergrad or the law school or whatnot? But they might be another resource to use. I don't know, Matt or Jenny, have you ever come across compliance interns like that? I have other questions too, but I'm hung up on the interns at the moment.
I've had them. I've had law students who have come to work for a summer or something like that in our legal department. I've never had a college, if I think about it in a more traditional sense, like a college intern. Although I also don't think I'd love it. The more the merrier. But I've seen them from the legal context with law students coming to do that in-house. I don't know if Jenny has.
Yep, same thing here is that I've experienced law students as well, right? And which is great because it really helps you foster the compliance. As we know, I don't know what the future holds for compliance professionals, right? So it really helps young attorneys or young budding attorneys to really understand, it's not just all about your traditional legal expertise. You can manage it and use your degree and your knowledge and what you learn in law school, as an attorney, you could really use it in so many different ways, right? So, but yeah, I think that the law school intern has been really successful in that sense. And I know that I still stay in touch with some of them, and they say, wow, this is, something that I really want to get into, which is always near and dear to my heart because when somebody says, I would love to go into compliance, that's not a phrase that you often hear. Right. So it's always something that's near and dear to my heart.
We have a couple of people here who are chiming in that they have had interns and generally to good success. Here's one from Fordham who's actually volunteering to be an intern. But I would just say, call up your local law school, find the professor who runs the head of corporate securities law teaching and courses, and tell them what you're doing. $10 says that they probably would have a bunch of budding young lawyers who'd be happy to stick them onto your program and your issue. I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are the important other functions to work with, not just in an ambassador sense, but really to basically have them do some of the work. And Matt Silverman, you kind of touched on this when you said, yes, I've had interns, but it's more the law department has interns wandering in from the law school and we get our claws into them. But I'm thinking more about, you can work with HR a lot. You could work with IT security. You could work with the legal team. I don't know if I'm forgetting any others, but let me ask you first, Jenny, and then maybe Matt Silverman, and then Nick. Who are the ones that you really want to build those long-lasting relationships? Because they're doing other things similar to you and you want to try and sneak it in, who's on your hit list that you have to be BFFs with these people here?
Yep. So in my opinion, I think that your BFF has to be your legal team. There's too much overlap, and you have to support each other and so much if you are separate from the legal team, right? So I think that to me is a measure of success in terms of protecting and managing the risk within the organization, is making sure that you really partner closely. And if anybody is able to, in a 20-second elevator speech, say what the exact differences between legal and compliance, please let me know. Right? So, but because they do so go hand in hand. So I would say the legal team is really, really tremendous. Second is the business function, right? The key business function, whether it's going to be your marketing team, commercial sales, whatever it may be, depending on your organization and industry. I think that is very key too, because you want to be able to foster those relationships, have some indirect influence, right? And where they're not going to be running the other way. They're not just coming to you to ask a question and to give permission to do something, right? But you really, really embed that accountability to all the employees. And of course, you had mentioned that the very obvious is going to be like IT and HR. HR is a tremendous effective partner, because so much of what ethics and compliance does, depending on how it's structured within your organization, really overlays in HR as well, right? And so I think that those are, if you're new to an organization, or if you're trying to go in and figure it out, I think those are the areas that are really, really important to not only, help you in terms of, hey, how do we split this? How do we go ahead and leverage our resources together to do this and whatnot, but also to be your advocate, right? Because they too have, reporting lines, and they do speak to, it goes up the chain. So have them also be your advocates to really not necessarily speak on your behalf, but to really support what you're trying to do and really support this whole culture of compliance. It's tricky, right? But that's what I would say off the top of my head.
And Matt Silverman, what's your thoughts? And then Nick, I'll circle back to you too.
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate what Jenny said. HR, IT security are huge for what we do, working with them, not just from a trade compliance perspective, but other areas as well. I think, fortunate to say that in different compliance roles that I've had, whether it's been as in-house counsel or as a compliance professional, I've been within the legal department. I once worked at a company where they had legal and compliance very separated. And I thought it was, for me and for the organization itself, it was very confusing. There was a lot of overlap there, and people weren't always sure who was doing what and how to do it. And there was a separation there that I just didn't think was necessary. So I'm a big proponent of having the compliance group within the legal department, and to use your legal counterparts, whether it's for, privacy, HIPAA issues, or for what I do with trade compliance, right? To use those resources. And then, for what I do, we work a lot with sales. We work a lot with marketing to educate and train them. And even if you don't work with those specific functions, even if it's not as applicable for the type of compliance that you work in, again, just the idea of it is very applicable, which is, you're not trying to make people subject matter experts. You're not trying to make other people compliance professionals. But what we try to do is give people enough knowledge so that they can be somewhat autonomous in making decisions, right? We still want them to know, you've got a really important issue, you've got a question, you have no idea what to do, or you think you might be, violating the law or internal policy, come to us. That's what we're here for. But we're also trying to give departments and colleagues enough information so that they know where the information is, they know what the policies are, they know what the rules are, so that they can also make those determinations, and they're well trained enough so that they don't have to come to us with every single issue that pops up. So, and it's sometimes hard to balance, right? You want people to be educated and make decisions autonomously, but you also want them to know we're here to support that. But I can't say enough about just the collaborative effort that I think compliance involves with different departments within your organization.
And then, Nick, what do you think about all of this?
I think, life is relationships. So, Jenny said it and Matt just said it, it takes a lot of collaboration. And I think, when we're talking about stretching our budget, what are we talking about? We're either doing the same with less, or we're doing more with what we have. And I think when we have and look at the nature of what we're talking about, right? Ethics and compliance is this circulatory system. There's so much that we have to get right in order to be effective. We have to be marketers. We have to be data analysts. We have to be persuasive. We have to be good salespeople. Like, we have to be, smart. We have, there's so many different facets. This is not like a one-dimensional job at all, because at the end of the day, we're trying to influence people. I'm just saying, I just named off a couple of these different things. When we have good relationships with somebody in sales, you can go to them and say, hey, I have this board meeting and I'm trying to, get some more budget. Here's my kind of persuasion path. What kind of advice would you have? Great. Now you have some of that sales acumen embedded in your talk track. Hey, I'm launching a compliance week. Here are some graphics. Can you help me with that, my marketing friend? Or, hey, friend in audit, you live in spreadsheets all the time. I can't make heads or tails of this analysis. Can you give me 15 minutes and help me with it? If you have actual relationships with these people, and you can actually collaborate with them, it really opens up a ton of leverage for you. And that's a massive way to do a lot more with what you have. The name of the game here is not like, let's keep doing what we're doing and get rid of some heads. That's a way to stretch the budget. I'm saying, let's do more with what we have, and we can really supercharge ourselves and superpower ourselves through some of those collaborative relationships if we can build them authentically.
So yeah, if I may interject. Oh, sorry, Matt. What Nick said is so incredibly, to me, so incredibly valuable, right? And the way that I sum it up is just like hide the vegetables, right? The way that I sum it up is there's a push and pull, right? Compliance shouldn't always be a push. Like, you need training, you need policies, we need this, you need to be compliant, right? It's the pull as well. Right? What are you doing what are you pulling? What are you asking of them? What do you need as well? It's not always the push. And I think that that's something that, traditionally compliance functions and programs just haven't done, because if you think about it, why compliance has been born and bred, right? It's to, oh my gosh, everybody's getting in trouble. How do we not get in trouble anymore? Right? So, so you see a lot of companies, and you always hear this, are you rules-based? Are you principles-based? Et cetera, right? There's no one size fits all, but I think that it's really important to not just the push, but the pull, right? And that is something that I don't think that that any company or any industry is used to doing from a compliance standpoint, because it's always been the push. We can't get in trouble. This is what happened to other companies. This is what we need to do, right? It's the push. Well, what about the pull? All right. What do you guys like? What is going to be resounding to you? What do you, can you help me, right? Can you help me so that we can move forward? Can you help the compliance program, whatever it may be? So I think that it does require a definitely different mindset and approach to the way that we've always approached compliance, right? It's not about, being the no police. It's let's try to get some more people in, right? So that everybody starts to really foster this. It's not just you.
Right.
Well, I really liked the I had jotted down pushing versus pulling, and I think that's a concept a lot of compliance officers have heard elsewhere. But I have to admit, at the start of this hour, I thought we would have a lot of tips and hacks and whatnot to do more, but really that helps you just push more effectively. I have been struck that so far, Jenny, Nick, Matt Silverman, you have all been talking about how really to exert influence, which is more how you get people to pull you in. And once they're pulling you in, I suspect your budget goes a lot farther, because how much is it going to cost you to answer their phone call as opposed to you going and visiting and saying, I'm here. So that really is a good dynamic for compliance officers to keep in their heads.
And how much more context then when you're in those conversations do you now have to equip yourself in those budget conversations? Now you know what's going on the front line. You know what's going on over here because you've been pulled into those things, and you have a much fuller picture of what's going on in the organization. And all that can be more fodder or more gunpowder for the persuasion path, to get that budget expanded at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think to what you just said is, it's not about what do they need to do, it's what do we need to do, right? The approach of we. It's not just about them, it's we, right? And then, also, this is so different than anybody's really approached compliance programs, because it's always been, this is what you need to do, right? Well, how do you turn that around to say, well, what do we as compliance professionals need to do? Right? So we get it. The elements are there, the government's there and whatnot. It's very obvious, right? And that's the obvious approach. But I saw one question in here a while ago asking, how do you go ahead and make it resounding to those who are holding the purse strings? Maybe it's not so much talking, if you have, maybe it's not so much talking about, here are the gaps, here are the 7 elements, 8 elements, 9 elements, depending on what you consider an element these days, right? But here are the 7 elements and here are the gaps. Because that's very data oriented, it's very obvious, right? But it's not always resounding to leadership to be like, okay, so we need more training, we need more policies because the government tells us to, right? Well, have you thought about, rather than doing that, because you're probably not going to get a lot of good response if you tried that way before of, here are the 7 elements, we need to have them, here are the gaps, here's our assessment, here are the gaps. But have you tried to do, rather than that, what are the competencies, right? What are maybe 3 or 4 different competencies around compliance that are so important in your organization, right? Have you talked about, okay, here's the competency in our marketing function, in our sales function, in our R&D function, totally depending on what your industry is, and say, as you can see, the competency is very low in here versus here. So, and that's another data point, right? And to show, in order to do that, then, in order to increase it, we're going to need a training program, or we're going to need whatever it may be. So I think that, there's so many different ways that you can slice and dice it without being very cookie cutter of, here's what the government expects, here's what the the USSG guidelines are for an effective, here's what the DOG guidelines are in healthcare, here's what the OIG guidelines are, right? That tends to scare people, but maybe it's more so, well, here are the competencies, around, I mentioned, anti-kickback, right? Mm-hmm. Kickback issues, the marketing group, sales group, whatever it may be, and here's where they are. Next year, I would like to see it here. The following year, I would like to see it here, and that is only if we have a good training, or whatever it may be, right? And then that also gives some skin in the game for leadership, because then you say, and if you don't agree, if you feel that's okay, then you have to be okay with that and not give me any budget or head count, right? So it's not so much we need to do this, but here are the options. If we don't do this, this is where the competency is going to be. If you're willing to take that risk, right, that's what's going to happen. So I think it's, taking the personal out of, but it's needed and we need to have this, It's more like, well, here are the options. Either the competency is going to be here or it's going to be here. Wherever you want to go, let me know, but it's going to take some money. It's going to take some head count.
All right. And then when you present it that way, you present yourself as such a great business person, because we're all grappling with the gray. We're all living in the gray, and we're all thinking, your boss is thinking in bets all the time, right? So presenting it that way, and instead of speaking on this black and white, we should do this. To your point, I just think it's so much more compelling. It's so much more actionable, and it incorporates an outcome beyond some list of 7 things that some government agency is pushing out that this person has never read. You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, we are at the end of the hour, so we will have to wrap it up here. But this has been a great conversation. I appreciate all the tips from the listeners. Jenny McVeigh from BioMérieux, if I'm probably mangling that again. Matt Silverman from Viavi Solutions, and Nick Gallo. Nick, I don't know if you have any other final thoughts, but otherwise, Jenny and Matt, thank you very much for joining us. This has been a great discussion.
Yeah, Jenny, Matt, thanks for joining. Kara dropped a ton of amazing tips. Thank you for those, Kara, in the chat. This was such a great Ethicsverse episode. They just seem to keep getting better. So Matt, thank you for hosting it. Jenny, thanks for coming on. Matt, thank you for joining us as well. We didn't get to see your beautiful face, but hopefully next time. See you guys all next week on the Ethicsverse. Bring a friend. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.